How does the new TraceTogether token work? Well, we share what you need to know about this small wearable device.
Getting back to normal at last, entry restrictions are easing at 4 popular markets this weekend.
And imagine waking up to this apocalyptic sky. Well, that's exactly what happened to residents of San Francisco.
Good evening, you're watching The Big Story, coming to you live from the Straits Times newsroom. I'm Dylan Ng.
And I'm Haryanto Dima. Now you can subscribe to the Straits Times channel so you never miss a single episode.
We begin with the latest COVID-19 situation in Singapore. 63 new cases were confirmed today, taking the total count to over 57,200. They included 2 community cases, comprising a Singaporean and a work pass holder.
There were also 6 imported cases who had been placed on stay-home notices upon their arrival here. Now more details will be released tonight. The COVID-19 Multi-Ministry Task Force yesterday announced that from next Monday, September 14th, Singapore residents will progressively receive TraceTogether tokens.
The nationwide distribution exercise will start in 2 districts, Jalan Besar and Tanjong Pagar. The new contact tracing tokens will be distributed free of charge.
Here are 3 things to know about the device. First, how does the TraceTogether token work? Well, users can carry the small token in a bag or in their pocket. And the token exchanges short-distance Bluetooth signals with nearby tokens or handsets that have the TraceTogether app, and this interaction is logged into the devices. All logs are encrypted and logs older than 25 days will be automatically erased. If the user becomes infected with COVID-19, the device will need to be physically handed over to the authorities to extract the data needed for contact tracing.
Where and when can I collect my token? Well, collection of the tokens will begin in areas with a higher proportion of seniors, since they are more vulnerable to COVID-19. These are the areas where distribution will begin next Monday, including Buona Vista, Potong Pasir and Queenstown. Residents in areas including Bedok and Eunos can collect their tokens from September to October. And from October to November, residents in areas including Bukit Batok and Bukit Panjang can pick up their tokens.
The tokens can be collected at the designated community centres or clubs. Now you will need to present your original identity document with barcode during collection. And you can collect the tokens on behalf of your family members by producing their identity documents. For more information on the collection, you can visit the Token GoWare website.
Whom can I contact if I need help with my token? Users who require assistance with their tokens can email to this address or call the hotline on weekdays during office hours. We're pleased to welcome back Professor Teo Yik Ying, Dean of the Swee School of Public Health at the National University of Singapore. Professor, plenty of things brought up in last night's press conference, from the distribution of the TraceTogether tokens to resumption of more senior-centric activities to heavier fines for first-time offenders in the F&B sector. What was your biggest takeaway?
Thanks for having me again. Actually, it was the overall message that came across that was important. That Singapore is preparing to put in place all these necessary safe management measures at the population level to ensure that many of our activities can carry on safely. So if you look at what was also announced this week around the plans for some of the MICE event, the meetings, incentives, convention, exhibition, I think Singapore is clearly positioning itself to move towards a state of normalcy that will allow our travel, our trade, and our business activities to resume to a much larger extent. And for that to happen, we really need to have in place the measures in the community and in settings that are most susceptible to drive community transmission. And this is really why there was a particular focus last night on the F&B sector, because we know from local, global data, this is one of the most common settings for community transmission to happen. And the other aspect that is important is that as we allow more activities to resume, is the ability to shut down community chains of transmissions as quickly as possible. And this means we need to have a much better way, quicker way of performing the contact tracing. And this is the reason why we're moving towards the use of TraceTogether and to distribute it to the whole community.
Prof, let's zoom into the details of yesterday's press conference. We want to get your thoughts on something Second Minister for Manpower, Dr. Tan See Leng, said yesterday. Now, let's have a listen to that first.
Now, many of the dormitory residents are COVID naive. They've never been infected, so they continue to remain susceptible to COVID-19. However, we are prepared for this. We have put in place a multi-layered strategy to detect as well as to contain any new infections very quickly and very decisively.
Can you perhaps shed more light on what Dr. Tan has said? Do you agree or disagree with him?
So there are two aspects here to what Minister have said. First is the extent of spread within the dormitories. Second is the multi-layer measures that have been put in place. So on the first issue regarding the extent of spread in the dormitories, I believe the Ministry of Manpower will have the findings from the test that were performed to clear the dormitories. And based on what we see presently, it does suggest that of the entire population of foreign workers, there is still a substantial proportion of them that remains susceptible to be infected. That is why the second point that Minister said about the layers of measures to protect everyone in the dormitories is especially important. I would actually classify the measures put in place in the following three manners. The first is around surveillance. And this really includes the fortnightly testing of all the residents in the dormitories, including as well as the wastewater sewage testing. This repeated test will help to flush out any infections, particularly the asymptomatic ones that happen to slip through the earlier tests that were used to clear the dorms. Because some of the infected people were still in the incubation period when this batch testing to clear the dorms were performed. The second is really around control. And this includes the contact tracing, identifying who are the exposed workers, the ability to isolate and quarantine them very quickly to protect the rest of the community in the dormitories. The third is around prevention. And this includes the safe management measures that are in place at the work sites, at the dormitories to really reduce the chance that people will be infected.
Now, the multi-ministry task force said that since the dormitories were declared cleared nearly a month ago, there have been an average of 45 workers testing positive daily, and 12 clusters have resurfaced in the past week. Now, in dormitories that were previously cleared of the virus, that sounds to me like a second wave. What say you?
Well, it really depends on what we define as waves of infection. WHO has actually explicitly warned against such classifications, and really it is just a name. I think the reality is we want to stamp out any infections whenever we see them, be it sporadic cases, be it cluster of infection, or be it widespread transmissions that's happening in the dorms. Our strategy remains the same, whether we call it a second wave or whether this is just the tail end of the first wave.
Let's look at the other aspect that was brought up yesterday during the press conference as well. Now, just this past weekend, 7 F&B outlets in popular night spots were found not complying with safe distancing measures. Now, each outlet has been fined $1,000. Why is the F&B particularly bending the rules?
So let us first reinforce the fact that the setting where people come together for a meal without mask, where there will be the inevitable mealtime conversation, duration of contact is likely to be high since we do take our time to finish the meals. These are exactly the high-risk settings that we know being extremely conducive to spread infections. We talk about the 3 C's. Closed spaces, typically referring to air-conditioned and closed environments, crowded places, and close contact settings. F&B outlets will fulfill 2 to 3 of these 3 C's. And this is the reason why there are very strict rules for the F&B sector. And for this sector, it comes down to a matter of competition. That if the restaurant next door is willing to take the risk and illegally allow groups of more than 5 to make bookings, then customers may actually take the business to this adventurous restaurant instead. And this is why safe management measures have to go beyond just implementation. But there is also the need for enforcement by the authorities and for sanctions to punish those that flout the rules. This way, the playing field becomes more even, and there is instead huge disincentives when trying to test the law. And I think it's important to realize that worldwide, we see sensible governments, including those from Hong Kong New Zealand and Australia, they clamped down on the F&B sector as the first layer of control whenever there is a resurgence. And there's a reason why the rules are there. It is not to penalize the operators, the owners of these eateries, but really to allow a viable compromise where there is still the opportunity for businesses to continue while minimizing the risk of infections. I would just end off by saying that if Singapore doesn't control this well, if eateries just become adventurous and there's very little enforcement, they may thrive for a few weeks where they bring in a lot of business. But when community infections spike up again, we may have to go through another painful circuit breaker all over again. And I think this is much more damaging to businesses, to livelihoods, and not to mention the overall reputation of Singapore.
We've been speaking to Professor Teo Yik Ying, Dean of the Salisbury Hock School of Public Health at NUS. Entry at 4 popular markets will no longer be restricted to the odd-even system from this Saturday, September 12th. But there will be a cap on the number of people allowed in at any one time. The 4 wet markets are Geylang Serai Market, Chong Pang Market at Yishun Ring Road, the market at Block 2021 Marsiling Lane, and the one at Block 505 Jurong West Street 52. Other measures still remain, like the use of safe entry and the 1 meter distance between patrons.
Local scientists have developed an integrated monitoring system that can be easily attached to any face mask in order to monitor the wearer for health indicators associated with COVID-19. Sensors pick up skin temperature, blood oxygen saturation, blood pressure and heart rate, all of which are parameters associated with coronaviruses. The mask could be given to COVID-19 patients in hospitals and allow staff to monitor their vital signs remotely, reducing the risk of infection for frontline workers.
6 party buses, often decked out in strobe lights and catering to those who frequent popular night spots, have been confiscated by the authorities over the last 2 months. Apart from offences including illegal modifications and having people without a valid licence drive the buses, the Land Transport Authority said that such buses could also potentially thwart Singapore's efforts to limit COVID-19 transmission. This as they may allow passengers to ignore safe distancing measures. Those who come across such party buses can report them at the One Motoring website.
A Taiwanese woman who purposely sneezed at a security guard was sentenced today to 11 weeks in jail. Back in April, Sun Su Yan was denied entry into Iron Orchard shopping mall for not wearing a mask and using a scarf to wrap around her mouth instead. She then sneezed into the security guard's direction when she wasn't allowed to enter the mall. She had pleaded guilty in a district court in June to 1 count of performing a rash act and an unrelated harassment charge.
If you remember, there were complaints of long queues at some polling stations on polling day back on July 10th. The Elections Department said today that it was the result of COVID-19 precautionary measures put in place which reduced voting efficiency. For instance, the allocated time bands did not succeed in spreading out voter turnout throughout the day. A third of the voters who showed up at polling stations during the morning time bands meant for senior voters were not seniors. ELD also noted that resources at the 25 large polling stations could have been better distributed, with more election officers or e-registration devices.
Now, after a 4-year battle, the former domestic helper of the Changi Airport Group chairman was cleared of all charges this week.
And now her lawyer has spoken out about her fight for justice.
It was a very, very difficult trial, not just because we knew it was going to last 10 months. It was a very difficult and long drawn trial because of the sheer number of items that we had to deal with, or at least I had to deal with. And I didn't have any assistance, so I had to rely on a well-managed or well-accounted for set of documents, understand Parti's instructions clearly. Lucky point that we had was we asked the court to have all the items presented before it, because usually all of this is done at the trial level, but at the appellate level it's more oral, and the court agreed, and that allowed us to present to to the court what you can't see in pictures. So the condition of the items, the clothes, the rags, the very old DVDs, or DVD players, sorry, the earrings, the jewelry that was outdated. You could see in a photograph, you could see in a color photograph, but you don't really appreciate until you see it. We had to basically convince a judge that, look, why would someone steal junk? If you look at Parti's case, if she had pleaded guilty at the first mentions or shortly after the offer was given in 2017, she would have been at home now, 2.5 years down the road. Or perhaps even quicker, because the offer was for just a couple of charges, or at least 1 or 2 charges. And she could have restarted her life, continued working in another country, and just thought about what happened in 2016, 28 October 2016, when she was dismissed as just a bad dream. Problems with our justice system, where you are, or it's where foreign domestic workers or foreign workers just don't know what they're up against. They don't know who to turn to. They feel that it's convenient, or they are given the impression that it's just convenient to apologize and plead guilty. And that's where I think that power of that home team came in. It was a group of very dedicated, in fact, mostly women, who believed also in Yani's innocence. And I kind of also knew, that I had the support from home. While we protect these vulnerable workers under our penal code if harm is done unto them, our criminal justice system doesn't necessarily protect them when there's an accusation against them. Now, it's easy to say the criminal justice system is busted and we need to fix it, but I think as we move forward and as we get a little more advanced as a nation, we need to realize that the system as we envisioned it doesn't cater for these unrepresented folks. I'm talking about politically unrepresented. And the reason why I say that is, with proper representation, these issues are naturally adjusted or heard. But without this representation, you don't know until something terrible happens. If I could say, lawyers like myself who work on pro bono matters do some work, but the real work is done by a lot of these NGOs.
The full interview with Mr. Anil Balchandani is on Home's YouTube channel. The link is in the description below.
Let's now take a look at what's making headlines around the world. A new study by Yale offers the first evidence that in some COVID-19 patients, the coronavirus invades the brain and not just the lungs. It found that headaches, confusion, and delirium experienced by certain patients could be the result of the virus staving brain cells of oxygen. The research is still preliminary and further study needs to be done.
Residents of Jakarta are bracing for a return to a partial lockdown starting on Monday due to a resurgence in COVID-19 infections. Jakarta's governor said the city is going back to the early days of the pandemic when everyone will once again work from home and study from home. Java and Bali Islands currently have the highest number of active cases in Indonesia with more than 23,000.
Yoshihide Suga, Japan's chief cabinet secretary, is the front-runner among voters to succeed Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. That's based on a poll published today by Mainichi Shimbun. About 44% of respondents said they would choose Mr. Suga, while 36% picked former Defense Minister Shigeru Ishiba. The Liberal Democratic Party leadership election will be held on Monday.
In the world of sports, four-time Formula One world champion Sebastian Vettel will race for Aston Martin come 2021 on a multi-year deal. Currently under the name Racing Point, the Canadian-owned team will be known as Aston Martin come next season. Vettel replaces outgoing Mexican driver Sergio Perez, who's set to leave at the end of the 2020 season.
Now, have you ever seen San Francisco look like this? The sky turning orange like a city on Mars or a scene in a post-apocalyptic movie. Turns out it's just a smoky layer of air as a result of the raging wildfires across California. Amazing scenes. What would you do if you woke up you saw this scene from your window?
My goodness, I don't know. I'll be quite nervous actually. And in fact, you mentioned that you've seen this somewhere before.
Yes, I've seen it in, where does it remember? Oh yes, Blade Runner, the movie. So I think there was a scene when the main character comes out and then he sees this scene. It's quite scary actually.
I would imagine, yeah.
Well, those are our top stories for today. For more news and videos, do visit straitstimes.com and subscribe to our YouTube channel by hitting the red button below.
That's right. Once again, I'm Haryanto Diman with Dylan Ang. Now we'll leave you with a sneak peek into the new Apple store at Marina Bay Sands, which opens its doors today.